There comes a moment in life that no parent prepares for. One day, you're the one they run to for answers, for comfort, for guidance, for protection. The next, your voice seems to echo in the background. Your suggestions are brushed aside. Your presence, once central, now feels optional. This isn't about ego. It's about worth. If you've noticed your children treating you with less respect, as though your experience no longer matters, as if your time is less valuable, it can feel like a deep betrayal. But you're not powerless. In fact, you may hold more influence than you realize. You just need to shift the way you see yourself first. Let's begin with the first 3 foundational steps. Action 1. Stop chasing their approval. One of the most common traps parents fall into as they grow older is the quiet, desperate chase for approval. It's subtle. You offer to help even when you're tired. You say yes when every part you want to say no. You hold back your real thoughts because you're afraid of pushing them away. But the truth is, the more you chase approval, the more invisible you become. Margaret was 73 when she began realizing that her grown children made every decision without her. Holidays, family plans, even simple things like dinner, she was the last to be informed. Instead of speaking up, she tried harder to please them. She cooked their favorite meals, rearranged her schedule around theirs, and stayed silent when they spoke over her. "I just want to keep the peace," she said. But peace without self-respect isn't peace. It's self-erasure. Respect isn't earned through sacrifice. It's earned through boundaries, through clarity, through dignity. When you start acting like your feelings matter, others are more likely to treat them that way. Start small. If you don't feel like doing something, say no. If a comment stings, name it. You don't have to shout. You just have to show that you're still here and that you still count. Because the moment you stop chasing their approval, you give them a reason to look up and see you again. Action 2. Don't argue. Lead by example. It's tempting to confront disrespect head-on, to remind them of everything you've done, to say, "After all I've given you, this is how I'm treated." But arguments rarely build respect. They often harden the walls that already exist. Frank, a retired teacher, was used to command. In the classroom, his voice held weight. But at home, his adult children would interrupt him, ignore his advice, and correct him condescendingly. At first, he pushed back, trying to prove he still deserved their ear. The more he argued, the worse it got. Then something shifted. Frank stopped responding with emotion. Instead, he listened. He responded slowly, calmly. He started acting like a man who didn't need their respect, because he already had his own. Over time, his children noticed. Not all at once, but they began pausing when he spoke. They asked for his thoughts more often. They softened. He hadn't won their respect by fighting. He had reminded them what dignity looks like. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to explain your worth. You just have to embody it. And eventually, people rise to meet that energy. Action 3. Withdraw your emotional dependence. As parents, your lives revolved around your children for decades. Their joys became your joys. Their needs shape your days. But as they grow into their own lives, it's easy to feel abandoned and to crave their attention in ways that might push them further away. Helen, 76, used to wait by the phone. If a day went by without hearing from her kids, anxiety crept in. She'd call, leave messages, and when they didn't respond, she'd feel forgotten. But slowly, she realized something. The more she needed them, the more distant they became. So she made a quiet change. She started going for walks in the park. She joined a watercolor class. She went to movies alone. And one evening, her phone rang. "Hey, Mom, what have you been up to lately?" There was something new in their tone. Curiosity, not obligation, not guilt. The truth is, people respect emotional independence. When your children see that your happiness isn't tied to them, they feel freer and strangely more drawn to you. You're not being cold. You're showing them that you have a life worth respecting, and that, more than any speech or plea, changes everything. Action 4. Set boundaries and enforce them. Respect begins at the edge of a boundary. Without them, even the most well-meaning children can start taking you for granted. Not because they don't love you, but because they don't realize where the lines are. Robert, a retired business owner, had always been a calm, reasonable man. But when it came to his adult children, he struggled to assert himself. They interrupted him during conversations, dismissed his suggestions, and occasionally mocked his choices. For years, he said nothing. "They're just being kids," he'd say, even though they were in their 40s. But inside, resentment grew. One afternoon, after being talked over yet again during a family dinner, Robert quietly stood, placed his napkin on the table, and said, "When you're ready to speak with respect, I'll be happy to stay." The room fell silent. No yelling, no scene, just a firm, calm declaration of self-respect. It was the beginning of a new chapter in their relationship. Setting boundaries isn't about ultimatums. It's about consistency. If you say a certain tone is unacceptable, don't laugh it off next time. If you decide you won't rearrange your schedule for last-minute plans, stick to it. Boundaries lose their power the moment you ignore them. And when you enforce your limits with grace and steadiness, people begin to realize that you're not trying to be difficult. You're simply honoring yourself. Action 5. Stop giving without appreciation. Giving is one of the most beautiful parts of being a parent. But when giving becomes habitual, even when it's met with silence or entitlement, it loses its joy. Worse, it can begin to chip away at your self-worth. George, 78, was known as the rock of his family. He provided financial help, babysitting, and even rides to the airport in the middle of the night. But something changed when he fell and broke his ankle. For the first time, he needed help, and nobody showed up. That moment changed everything. He realized his giving had become expected, not appreciated. His children weren't unkind, but they had come to see his sacrifices as a constant, like running water. Always there, always flowing. So George made a new rule. He would no longer give without acknowledgement. He started saying, "Let me think about it," instead of course. He stopped offering help before it was asked. And slowly, a shift occurred. His children began saying, "Thank you" more. They checked in before asking for favors. And they noticed when he said no. Generosity should be a gift, not a guarantee. When people know that your help comes from a full heart, not from obligation, they treat it with more care. It's not about withholding love. It's about requiring respect. Action 6. Build a life beyond them. The most powerful version of you is the one who lives fully, not for others, but for yourself. Eleanor, a widow in her 70s, found herself slipping into a quiet dependence on her children. They were her calendar, her entertainment, her emotional anchor. And slowly, without noticing, she became smaller in their eyes. Her phone calls started going unanswered. Her suggestions were brushed off. She felt invisible. Then one day, instead of waiting, she did something radical. She joined a writing group. She bought a ticket to a weekend retreat. She planted a garden, not for show, but for joy. And the most surprising thing happened. Her children started calling more. Not because she asked, but because they were curious. She had stories to tell again, laughter in her voice, a sparkle in her eye. When you build a life that's rich, curious, and full, even in small ways, you send a message without saying a word. I am still here, and not just surviving, living. This kind of independence isn't just attractive, it's magnetic. It inspires those around you, especially your children, to see you in a new light, not as someone waiting for their time, but as someone who values their own. Let your presence speak for you. There's a kind of wisdom that doesn't need to announce itself. It simply walks into the room and is felt. That's what you're aiming for now. It starts in small moments, the way you hold eye contact, the way you sit at the table and take your time to speak, the way you don't fill silence with nervous chatter, but allow it to exist. Presence is not about being loud or opinionated. It's about being so rooted in yourself that others sense it before you say a word. Children, no matter their age, are deeply perceptive. They pick up on energy even more than words. And when your energy shifts from needing their approval to simply existing in your own truth, they respond. Not always immediately, not always perfectly, but gradually, undeniably. They begin to ask, "What's different about Mom?" or Why does Dad seem more confident lately? And they begin to respect what they can't quite explain. Detach without bitterness. There's a fine line between healthy detachment and silent resentment. Detaching means giving them room to grow, even if it means they grow away from you for a while. It means loving them without leaning on them. It means no longer measuring your worth by how often they visit or call. Bitterness is different. It's when we carry pain but pretend not to. When we say, "I'm fine," but secretly tally every missed birthday or forgotten thank you. To truly reclaim your peace, you must choose detachment, not as a defense, but as a gift to yourself. Marie, 81, used to get angry when her daughter didn't check in regularly. She'd leave pointed voicemails, hoping to guilt her into calling. It never worked. Then one day, Marie stopped waiting. She stopped expecting. She began spending her mornings journaling, her afternoons walking in the park, and her evenings watching sunsets from her porch. And something inside her shifted. When she calls, "I'm happy," Marie said. When she doesn't, "I'm still whole." That kind of peace is contagious. It draws others near, not because you chase them, but because they feel safe around your quiet strength. Rediscover joy without permission. One of the most revolutionary things you can do as an aging parent is to stop waiting for permission to be happy. Stop waiting for the invitation. Stop waiting for acknowledgement. Stop waiting for your children to treat you a certain way so you can finally feel good. Feel good now. Start the painting class. Learn to play the piano. Plant tomatoes. Rewatch your favorite movies. Read the poetry that once made you cry in the best way. Reclaim the parts of yourself that were buried under decades of responsibility. Because here's the truth. The more joy you create in your own life, the more your children will begin to respect you. Not because you demand it, not because you guilt them into it, but because people are drawn to light. And the more you shine, the more they remember why they admired you to begin with. Final thoughts. The quiet return of respect. Respect doesn't come from fear. It doesn't come from begging. It comes from how you carry yourself in the face of being overlooked. When your children see you no longer pleading, but thriving. When they hear confidence in your voice where there used to be hesitation. When they watch you live your life, not in protest, but in fullness, something shifts. It's not always quick. It's not always clean. But it happens. Because children don't just need parents. They need examples. They need to witness what self-respect looks like in real time. And when you become that example, they begin to change, not because you told them to, but because you showed them how. So today, choose your dignity. Choose your peace. Choose your joy. Not to prove a point, but because you deserve it. And when you do, the respect you long for finds way back to you. Quietly, naturally, powerfully. Thank you for staying with us through this message. If something in these words touched you, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below. What part spoke to your heart today? And if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more videos that honor your journey and your voice. Until next time, remember, you don't have to fight for your worth. You already have it, and the world, including your children, will see it once you do.